English translation, 236th contact. Thursday, 26th of April, 1990, row 3 hours.
Indeed, you still appear. I already thought that you would not dare to come here again. If I am not mistaken, you were already here last Monday while I was away. That was on the 23rd. Is that true?
You speak the facts accordingly. Yes, I was here in your workroom and waited for you for more than 45 minutes.
Aha, but unfortunately I was on the move and did not return until 1920 HRs. But because you did not inform me that you were here, I went straight into the kitchen with some purchased goods under the arm and in the hand, while Eva had to carry a few things into the office. I was hardly there in the kitchen when Eva then came running along somewhat puzzled, and asked me if I had turned on the CD player in my office and had put a CD into the apparatus. Upon asking her why she had come to this absurd idea, since she had seen that I had gone directly into the kitchen, she told me that in my office, interestingly enough, my CD device was running and was playing a musical piece of Julio Iglesias in a rather loud manner. Naturally, I rushed off immediately in order to investigate. And indeed, my CD device was turned on and was loudly playing the 8th piece of a Julio Iglesias disc. Straightway, I ran back into the apartment and asked my wife and the children if they had possibly been in my office and had turned on the CD player, which I had turned off at noon before I left with certainty, before I also removed the CD contained therein. But all of them answered my question negatively, and secondly, how could the children even get into my office since they have no key to this room? Only my wife has such, and she insisted that she was not in the office and that she also had not given the key to the children at any time. So it still remained for me just to think of who could have otherwise been in my office, namely, anyone who would have needed a key in order to get into my workroom. The conclusion? It could have only been one of you. And since I really could not name anyone who had been in there except you, I just had to assume that you were actually the one who turned on the power and the apparatus and played the Julio Iglesias CD.
Yes, you returned at exactly 1921 HRs, and 35 seconds later, Eva opened the door to her workroom, which is connected to your room by a direct passageway. Unfortunately, I was carelessly given to the view that you yourself would come to your workroom first, so I was quite shocked then when it was Eva. Therefore, somewhat hastily, I had to rise from my very comfortable resting position and leave the room before Eva could notice me. Apart from the fact that our mutual swinging waves of differing kinds could have caused some harm if these had met one another, Eva still would have surely been a lot more frightened than me if she would have met me. For this reason of my hasty removal, it was, of course, no longer possible for me to turn off the music device. On the other hand, Eva would have probably been even more surprised if the music had suddenly stopped, for she had heard this upon entering, like also Silvano, who was moving along the upper floor. I must also confess to you that the music pieces heard by Eva and Silvano, which you had not interrupted then, were not the first ones. Before those, I listened to the sounds of the prisoner's chorus from the classical piece Nabucco, but the bolero and two country melodies left me no peace.
You seem to be quite versatile in the matters of music.
You are not the only one who can enjoy and be refreshed by the most diverse styles of music. Even as you love classical music, rock, country, truck songs, folk songs, pop, marching music, rap, soul, spirituals, gospel, and our music, as well as Oriental, Middle Eastern, and Far Eastern music and rhythms of the natives, I too am just as versatile and have no fixed boundaries in reference to the style and direction of this very pleasing, loosening, and profound muse.
I am surprised there, however, because I had often thought that I was a little crazy, for I have such diverse music directions. No matter what style and direction it always is, I can take pleasure in any harmonious music. Only with disharmonious things can I do nothing, such as with nonsense pop, which is so discordant that it threatens to tear up not only the psyche, but also the physique painfully. The most foolish thing here is that human beings have already become so confused that they designate better music, which is truly harmonious, like also pop, as the idiocy of disharmony.
This is because the human beings of the earth are already so false perceiving and false feeling that to them, disharmony appears as a purpose in life. The more the person succumbs to confusion and aberration, the more his or her innermost self aligns itself toward disharmony, which is particularly expressed in the sense that they become a stranger to true harmony and perceive disharmony as invigorating. This has now already been the case with the Earth humans for many years, specifically with the young generations who strive for an alienation from reality, which must necessarily end in misery. Therefore, it has also been the case for many years that only very seldom is such valuable music composed and played. Disharmony has already won such supremacy among the Earth humans that it is regarded as and also perceived as harmony.
It is directly a relief to hear you speak these words. You speak to me from the heart.
My words only correspond to the truth. But now it should be enough with that, for we should speak of other issues.
Of course. I would have a question, for example, that interests all of us passionately.
Actually, I wanted to talk about something else rather than to answer a question for you now. But your word stands before mine in such a wise as it is fitting for me.
Ta, you are not my physical son, but I would like to suggest to you that toward me in this kind and wise you do not.
The honor is due to you, not to me.
Please, we have gotten along well with each other for many years, and we have understood and appreciated one another. We have paid due respect to each other and have never tried to rise above one another. So please, it should now also remain so.
For me, it is a very great joy and honor to be allowed to hold you in high esteem.
This also corresponds to my thoughts, feelings, and emotions for you, but this should be in mutuality of equal status.
Your words delight me down to my deepest depths.
Yes, my friend, verum gaudium res severa est. Note, Latin in true joy is a serious thing.
That it is indeed. I thank you, my friend. But now to your question.
Yes. Ta, your name, what does it mean? What significance does your name have?
You do not know this?
No, because first of all, I have never asked for the meaning, and secondly, the name also is not registered in our book of names.
Then I will gladly give you the answer to your question. My name means, in the old Lyran as well as in our own language of today, he who lives life in wisdom.
I think that I had roughly expected a meaning of such kind. How could it be otherwise?
Good. Then can I now talk about that which I actually came for?
Actually, yes, if it is so urgent and important. Although, I actually would have still had another issue that concerns me personally, and that I just cannot cope with.
Then do not be rushed.
Well, I actually do not want to make a fuss about it, but what occupies me gives me some riddles. It seems to me that on Tuesday evening at 1930 HRs, something happened that holds a variety of oddities in itself, which I just cannot figure out.
Those are the concerns of which I wanted to speak with you. But tell me all of the events from your point of view.
You mean the story with the lightning strike?
My words refer to that, yes. But now please tell me everything, just as you experienced it.
Well, the whole afternoon, I was on the road with Eva, and settled my activities occurring outside the center for this day. It was Tuesday the 24th. We returned to the center at 19. 15 hers, and we were already happy down in the valley about the fact that in Schmidruti there always seemed to be nice weather, for the sky was blue and the sun let its rays fall down. We determined this when we drove by in Tablat. Unfortunately, the day had not been particularly nice with regard to the weather. It was constantly cloudy, and rain also fell on occasion. Shortly after Tablat, on the left side of the road, the sun shone on a meadow that was lush with blossoming dandelions, which is why it appeared as if the meadow shone in pure gold by the sun's rays. I was very excited about this, and thus also drew Ava's attention to the beautiful spectacle. When we came to the center, we unloaded the vehicle, after which I then went with Silvano to the ferry pond, in order to place mossy stalks, roots, and branches there, all around the pond, and to place a stone weighing about a ton. We had just set the stone there in the afternoon, before 16 hours. So I stood close behind the large stone, leaned myself forward and toward Silvano, who stood a little lower than me on the road below, and who held out a tree stalk toward me, which I just wanted to take, while about 3 meters to the left of Silvano stood Bernadette and her son, Nathan, who were watching us. Just at that moment, when I had my hand in front of me toward the stalk and about 15 centimeters above the outer edge of the stone, a flash of light hissed from the near left. The hiss could only be heard for a tiny fraction of a second because it soon developed into a loud crackling, just as if two high-energy electric cables had collided. At the same time, a bluish-white arc of light shone on my thumb, and a powerful blow was sent into my hand, which raced into my shoulder and into the back of my head, and at the same time, into my right leg and foot. In the same split second, a flash of light tore out of my heel and struck a few centimeters into the underlying rock. A small rock fragment tore loose and shot off as a glowing pellet in the direction of Bernadette, while at the same time, about 35 centimeters below the upper edge of the stone, a brief splintering and cracking sound drowned out the electrical crackling, whereby several rock fragments hissed around Silvano's body. Once the splintering cracking occurred, the flash had emerged again from beneath the stone, and a half-palm-sized piece of stone fragmented and tore out at a depth of about a centimeter. I was able to grasp and see all of this in a tiny moment because I had looked directly at my hand when the flash struck into it. The blow to my hand was quite powerful, and so was the pain, which shot through me and which still continues to this day. Through the blow, I was also thrown back and, through this, made a small rotation to the left. But this only lasted for about a third of a second. This third of a second, however, was exactly the time when I saw a bluish-white, luminous ball shooting down about 7 meters to my left, which was the size of about 6 soccer balls, rushing down from the bright blue sky and from high above the Simya-se tree, at a height of about 2.3 to 2.5 meters above the ground, almost exactly halfway between the Atlas cedar and the American red oak, which stand at the bank of the ferry pond. The beaming object of light burst in a glistening explosion. Simultaneously, a deafening, bursting, and tearing thunderclap, so to speak, tore up the air directly over our heads, while a shock wave pressed down on me hard with my left knee on the large stone. Silvano was so shocked that he took an enormous leap backwards, while Nathan disappeared as fast as lightning into his room. Somehow a small wonder happened with Bernadette, who stood on the road just about 3 meters to the left of Silvano. Exceptionally, one could not hear her talking anymore, for obviously, the powerful thunderclap had simply robbed her of her voice. For some time she stood there stunned and was quite evidently thunderstruck. As this thought went through my head, I had to grin, despite the burning pain in my arm, also because of Bernadette's and Silvano's faces. Both were simply dumbfounded at that moment. But evidently, these two were just tremendously startled, for this only lasted for a short time before Eva came running out of her office and excitedly asked what the meaning of the enormous thunderclap was. Engelbert also said later that due to the crashing blow, he was literally launched up from the sofa, on which he sat comfortably in front of the television. Well, all that so far. But of course, I have considered all this, and have encountered some strange things that do not completely rhyme with a natural process of lightning. First of all, I was standing, as it were, directly under a roughly 12-meter high Japanese larch, which certainly would have served as a better lightning rod or lightning receiver than me. I must also say the same thing about the fairy pond, which was located only about 3.5 meters to the left of my location. This likewise applies to the 2 birch trees and the 2 black alders, which are about 12 meters tall, and which were located about 15 meters further to the left of me and on the other side of the fairy pond. Why, then, did not the lightning strike one of these large trees, even though the brightly glistening lightning ball, or just the ball of lightning, swept down there from high above the Simyase tree, first shooting down on the treetop of the large birch, severing it and striking it down, in order then to make a sharp turn toward the treetops, descending between the Atlas cedar and the red oak? And all of this with beautiful blue skies, and with the last sunshine of the day. A little too much all at once, I think, when I consider this strange incident. Something in this matter seems to be foul to me. Something just is not right, because everything was completely different than it was in other incidents, such as when during a thunderstorm, a ball of lightning closely hissed just 50 centimeters in front of my face and exploded, concerning which no one would believe and relieve me, if I could not appeal to the testimony of Freddy, who was standing just about a meter to the left of me during this event. Also, everything last Tuesday evening was completely different than it was at that time in the year 1977, when I stood here in the center, in the kitchen, during a thunderstorm and looked out the window, just to watch as an approximately 1 meter large ball of lightning rolled down over the roof and exploded just before the end of the roof in a glistening explosion, by what means some sheets of metal were torn off of the roof. This time, everything was completely different. Anyhow, that is how it looked to me, in its constitution and movement. And it was indeed a ball of lightning that I saw. By the way, there is a witness to this, because before Bernadette was thunderstruck, she too could still observe the ball of lightning as it shot from the sky and burst between the 2 trees mentioned. This is also why I still want to mention this, for our earthly scientists are still not sure whether balls of lightning actually appear, or whether they are fairy tales or hallucinations. And now, I think I have probably said everything, except perhaps that I will probably go to the doctor today because the pain has increased since the event, and there is still a slight burning sensation on the skin.
Your story was rather detailed and corresponds exactly to the records of the control disk. It will certainly also be good if you visit the doctor, just in case. Unfortunately, I cannot be helpful to you in this respect because I have no experience or training in such things. But still, you should come with me after our conversation so that I can at least determine whether you have suffered any harm.
I did not suffer any burns or anything like that.
Out of the Blue by Silvano Leomen, Switzerland.
It was on Tuesday evening, on the 24th of April 1990, at around 19:38 hours. The evening was bright with sunshine and an almost cloudless sky, which especially delighted me after the previous and rainy day. Throughout the entire morning, Barbara Lansendorfer, Atlant and I had gathered roots, mossy stalks, and branches from our ravine and transported them to their destination at the fairy pond. Then, in the evening, Billy and I wanted to spread the musty roots, stalks, and branches around the fairy pond and in the section of meadow lying to the left of it. I had kept a few exceptionally nice, old, mossy branches and very bizarrely grown roots specifically for the large, heavy stone that we had newly set up the day before, about 2 meters to the left of the fairy pond in the aforementioned meadow. So Billy and I began our work in a good mood. Billy stood in the section of meadow above me, about 2 meters next to the fairy pond, directly behind the stone that was placed there the day before, and took the branches and roots that I handed to him. Just as I held out a stalk to him, which he just wanted to take, there was a sudden rush of events that would already be a thing of the past within a second. So many different things happened almost simultaneously in my field of view that it is still difficult for me to arrange everything in chronological order. First of all, I noticed a hissing sound, but this became drowned out in the same moment by fragments that hissed by to the right of me, while I saw a bright ball of light shoot into the stone. At the same moment, so precisely at the moment when I wanted to give Billy the stalk, I saw his hand suddenly jump up and fly back, as if it had been beaten away by an immense force. And in that same split second, I also felt myself leap backward, as I felt blows of fragments in my pant legs and realized that I had gotten an enormous shock. Still during the mentioned leap, I noticed out of the corner of my eye a glaring ball of light, which had a diameter of perhaps 70 centimeters and which was roughly 4 to 5 meters to the right of me and about 2.5 meters high over the ground, next to the American red oak. Acoustically, the events were complemented by a tremendous thunderclap, which became accompanied by a shock wave that pressed down on me with such vehemence that I thought that my insides had evaporated in the area of my kneecap. When I came to my senses again, I noticed that with my huge leap backwards, I had leaped over almost the whole width of the road and now stood with empty hands in front of the border of the shed. Bernadette, who had been watching us with camera in hand, stood still in the same place, thunderstruck and in silence. When I had somewhat collected myself again, I went to Billy and asked him if he had been harmed and if he knew what the devil had happened. Billy told me and the others, who had come from the house in the meantime in order to investigate, that a flash of lightning had gone into his right thumb and had jumped from there to the stone in an arc of light. His hand felt numb, he said, similar to what would also be the case after a severe electrical shock. The flash was clearly a ball of lightning. This was also confirmed by Bernadette, who had mentioned the hissing sound in the direction of the birch trees standing on the right-hand side of the pond, and who got the ball of lightning exactly in her field of view, before it exploded between the Atlas cedar and the American red oak. Still for a while we discussed the incident, after we had realized that the flash actually should have hit either one of the tall trees nearby or the fairy pond, as this would have been logical. After we had discovered the chipped-off piece in the stone, we gradually came to the supposition that the whole incident had to concern something unnatural, and, perhaps, something that was controlled. But we could in no way imagine what background the whole thing had. We first learned this when Tar, on the 26th of April, during the 236th contact, explained the exact circumstances.
Billy in the same position in front of the stone in which he was struck by lightning. Photo from 24th of April, 1990, Freddie Kropf. The surface hole in the stone caused by the lightning's impact. Photo from 24th of April, 1990, Bernadette Brand.
Nevertheless, I would like to reassure myself of the harmlessness. Moreover, your supposition, or rather just your determination, is not unfounded that all of what had happened was not of such a natural origin as this should appear. The incident was contrived and directed. At the same time, when I speak of an unnaturalness, I do not speak of an unnaturalness where non-natural forces would have caused everything and would have put it into effect. The opposite is, In fact, the case, the flash of lightning itself, which went into your hand, as well as the ball of lightning, which actually was just as existent as what you observed earlier, these were of completely natural origin, arising from the electric energies of the atmosphere.
Main piece of the tree crown, in which the lightning entered and shattered it. Photo from 24th of April, 1990, Freddie Kropf. Engelbert Wechter holds the 5.5-meter tall crown piece of birch that was knocked down by lightning, which had gotten stuck in the branches of the tree and was taken down 3 months later. Photo from 23rd of July, 1990, Freddie Kropf.
The concentration of the energies also developed in a natural way. But the origin of the concentration had been caused artificially, just as the flash of lightning and even the ball of lightning had been directed.
Oh boy, I nearly imagined something like that myself. Perhaps it is also true, then, that the roaring thunderclap tore up the air at a height of just about 110 meters above us.
That is not exactly right, but your guess is very close to the realm of reality. How did you calculate this distance?
Quite simple. Arc of light, lightning's impact on my hand times the distance per second of the thunderclap. According to my calculation, the time was about 1/3 of a second. More precisely, slightly less than 1/3 of a second. In 0 degrees of temperature, the sound wave moves, to my knowledge, as a longitudinal oscillation at a velocity of 331 meters per second, which corresponds to a distance per 3 seconds of 993 meters. Thus, 3 seconds correspond to a round kilometer. So that is my calculation. Of course, I do realize that I cannot be very exact with that because I do not know the temperature that prevailed at the time of the event, and this is indeed important for an exact calculation.
I actually should have expected this logical answer from you. Well, the thundering occurred at an altitude of 108 meters above the ground. However, this was not a thundering that usually...
But I thought that...
Now you cannot actually know what I wanted to say.
However, my friend, that I can, for I thought of something similar myself. The thunderclap was brief, cracking, splintering, and tearing everything up. The air was simply torn to shreds, but not by the lightning, but by the thunderclap. But this is unnatural. Nevertheless, that is what I firmly determined as I was struck by the lightning. Ordinarily, and I know this damn well from experience, air is torn apart in a tiny moment when lightning hisses around. Calculated according to Adam Rees and other clever minds, the air should have been torn apart in front of my face at the moment of the roaring noise, as the lightning entered into my hand and repelled me. However, nothing like that happened, but just 1/3 of a second later, a peculiar thunderclap rumbled above our heads. But this, also in a manner that cannot be reconciled with a natural, brief thunderclap. To me, it rather seemed to be the roaring thunderclap of an ear-deafening explosion, just like at that time in that warlike world, during our journey in 1975, when you had to atomize the atomic airship of those lunatics in a hellish blast from an explosion. When those lunatics were so bold to release that unmanned death vehicle upon us. Everything about the crack of thunder on Tuesday reminds me of that time, but only one thing confuses me. On Tuesday evening, with the crack of thunder, I only saw the glistening ball of light explode and the arc of light on my hand. But otherwise, I saw nothing at all, at least nothing above the height where I should have actually seen an explosion, if my supposition is right.
Contrary to my assumption, you know it nevertheless. Yes, your supposition is correct and indeed very accurate. The thunderclap was an explosion, caused by the fact that a missile of an unmanned nature was destroyed by us, For this device was programmed to kill you, and to be sure precisely in that manner in which you experienced everything. The flash of lightning that went into your hand was just the search and target beam for the deadly energy ball, the ball of lightning, which was racing behind it. But even this targeting and searching beam would have been fatal for you, due to its powerful energy, if it had just hit you correctly, such as in your chest or in your back. Through our intervention, however, which occurred, unfortunately, somewhat late, for we were not yet completely masters over the things, the attack on your life was literally prevented at the very last moment. But unfortunately, we could no longer prevent that you still had to receive certain effects from the attack. Moreover, it was surprising for us when we determined that you were not even frightened, much unlike all the others who were present at the center. Now, the fact that you were not able to observe anything more than just the bright arc of light on your hand and the ball of lightning, this will no longer seem to be remarkable to you, once you know that the foreign flying apparatus that was set and programmed for you was completely shielded against every view and also against every technological means of detection, as this is also true for the process of the explosion of the flying object. We were not just able to muffle the sound of the explosion, but also the shock wave, which was still able to hit you with a weakened force. Unfortunately, we also could not prevent that, to a limited extent, you were exposed to weak radiation, but this will no longer adhere to you in a few weeks, and will not endanger you. These are actually the explanations that I wanted to make. This was also the reason for my visit and for my waiting for you on the 23rd, when Ava startled me. I came here that evening in order to warn you about this, but unfortunately, it still happened after all.
You are good, man, oh man. Do you also know that Eva is in the office next door and is sleeping? Man, we have all holes open in the building and are merrily babbling here while she is over there. It just amazes me that so far you have not cracked up yet and are not acting crazy. It is true that Ava is sleeping, but this should not be so determining.
We are actually very inattentive, and moreover, you did not make me aware of this. But fortunately, that is not of great importance. For our protective devices, such as this one here, have been so further developed in the meantime that they protect us for 92 minutes from any swinging wave that could be dangerous to us. So there is no danger in relation to this. But so that Eva does not wake up and does not come over here, I can do something. Just as my daughter placed your wife into a deep sleep before, I will do the same thing with Eva using this device here. So this touch here is sufficient. Now she will not be tempted to simply wake up and come here.
Good. But do you not want to explain to me what this is actually all about? Why one wanted to send me, yet another time, into the happy hunting grounds? Who is behind this, and why did one once again want to make me have a Nirvana ride? Apparently, some heroes are involved again, who are located somewhere in the Milky Way, because the Earthlings do not have such technological possibilities, as you mentioned them in your explanation. Or should the Brazilian minions or the heinous ones of Argentina and Bolivia be behind this? But no, they should not even have such possibilities, right?
That corresponds to correctness. But listen, you have very many enemies on the Earth, all around the globe, in Europe and in America, as well as in Asia and Africa. And in Africa, particularly South Africa is to be mentioned, and in Asian Japan. In all these continents and countries, there are many swindlers, liars, and deceivers who fear you. Due to their swindler-like and deceitful and fraudulent existence, which is why these Ausgearteten ones who have gotten very badly out of control of their good human nature want to hate you and murder you with the power of their thoughts. All of them, these swindlers, liars, and deceivers, who maintained that they would have contacts with us or with other life forms from the far reaches of space or with spirit forms, etc., are all urgent on removing you from life and killing you by their bad and negative thoughts. Unfortunately, even friends of yours lend their assistance in this because they succumb to the swindlers, liars, and deceivers, giving them the faith and the hands and all the means to harm you. They probably do all these things unconsciously because they, even your friends, are blinded by the liars and deceivers and swindlers and are no longer able to recognize the truth that on the earth, you alone have the task of spreading the true teaching of the creation, the spirit, and the laws and recommendations relating to this. And because of the liars, swindlers, and deceivers, who designate themselves as mediums, contactes, channelers, healers, or as some other fraudulent name, the human beings can no longer recognize that you are, solely and exclusively, the only one for all the human beings of the earth and, thus, for all human races, who can spread the teaching of the creation and the spirit, and who is incumbent upon this most difficult of all difficult tasks, and who fulfills this in modesty. In return for this, however, you are insulted by those to whom you bring rescue, which is for all of earthly humanity, and which is uniform for all peoples and races. Yet very many who call themselves your friends shamefully deceive you and try to make a profit from your knowledge and from the teaching. Through this, innumerable ones want to raise themselves above their fellow human beings and play master and prophet, even though they are removed from any knowledge of the truth, understanding, ability, any wisdom, and the fulfillment of the laws and recommendations. Thus they become traitors and insult you and threaten you and let it go so far that assassination attempts can happen against you, as this was the case another time last Tuesday in the form known to you. However, guilty for this are all those who are openly or indirectly your enemies, even those who call themselves your friends, but who deceive you and make a profit from your knowledge. Guilty for this are all those, such as all those in Europe, who work in various forms against you and your work. But also guilty for this are Randy Winters, Roberta Brooks, Fred Bell, and many members of MUFON and many other groups all over the world. Also guilty for this is Yoshi Kozakura, who in Japan has succumbed to liars, swindlers, and deceivers, and who has become disloyal to you and to the true teaching. Moreover, guilty are all of those around him, whom Yoshi Kozakura deceives with alleged contacts with us and other alleged extraterrestrials and alleged higher spirit forms. Guilty are all those who are your adversaries, because through the power of their betrayal, the power of their lies, fraud, and all swindle, as well as the power of their malicious, negative, and schizophrenic medium and channeling machinations, they generate tremendously lethal energies against you, which gather together in electromagnetic clusters all around the earth, and influence labile human begins to be just as negatively and maliciously against you as also powerful natural forces, such as the energies that produce lightning. So now, it has happened that a malicious group had the audacity to kill you through this and, in this manner, to destroy the entire teaching of the creation, the spirit, and the truth, by converting an aircraft in such a wise that it worked as an independent robotic unit and hunted after you. The simple process was that in the aircraft, all the negative swinging waves of the Earth humans that are directed against you were collected and stored in a block of sapphire of immense size, which was specifically provided for the aforementioned aircraft. For over 2 years, the fallible ones could work in this kind and wise before we finally became attentive to this. But this only happened because we were trying to fathom why Yoshi Kozakura became disloyal. At the same time, we encountered 3 individuals who are very strongly influencing persons, who live in tremendous fear of the fact that you could convict them of swindle, lies, and deception. The thoughts of these negative persons, however, were directed toward you in such a death-threatening manner that we felt compelled to explore the appropriate memory planes, through which we found out that there are tremendously destructive powers stored against you, and that of these, inconceivably large quantities were simply taken from somewhere. Getting to the bottom of this incident was obvious for us, and we soon found the perpetrators of this murderous doing. A residual group of the now dead Ashtar Sharan, who finally concluded his life in the Dal universe, felt obliged to be active as avengers of their former lord and master. And since they thought that they could avenge their dead master most impressively if they would nip the teaching of the truth on earth in the bud, they placed malicious, negative impulses in several of your friends, which made them become disloyal and enslaved to swindlers, deceivers, and liars, as in the case of Yoshi Kozakura and a few others. But in order to destroy the teaching of the truth, the spirit, and the creation, as well as its laws and recommendations, and to nip it all in the bud, they then thought that it was only necessary to transport you from life to death. And in order to manage all this, everything was to be handled in such a manner that a natural death would be faked. Death should have come to you through the fact that you would have just been hit and killed by lightning. The intention was that a ball of lightning would be directed toward you by a search and target beam, whereby the explosion of the energy bomb would have then torn you to pieces, which we could only just barely prevent at the last moment, unfortunately, so that the fallible ones could realize their plans at all. Until now, it was necessary for them that they got a hold of all negative energies of your enemies by storing these in the aforementioned block of sapphire. With these forces, it was then possible for them to collect and accumulate the natural electrical ether energies that are concentrated at a small point above your center in order. Then, to form the energy ball as an actual high point, to shoot this out of the block of sapphire and to let this follow behind the search and target beam at the same lightning-fast speed in order to rip you to pieces in its explosion. Then, for the human beings around you and also elsewhere, it would have looked as though you had been hit and killed by a strange ball of lightning from a bright blue sky, which would have then been represented by your enemies and by the traitors, as well as by all sectarians, as the wrath of God, as this was already devised and pre-programmed by the fallible ones, all of whom we have fortunately captured and whom, by the advice of the High Council, we have relieved of any technology and whom we have exiled to a planet for the rest of their lives, from where they can never return with certainty.
What should I say on top of that? How hateful these human beings must be, that they go on until the end. They are just poor, misdirected ones who try to destroy everything in wild hatred. But they are also megalomaniacal and as foreign to the creational truth as a human being can be. And the traitors here on the earth, as you call them, they are not even the slightest bit better in this respect. The megalomania and the craving for power and craving for sovereignty is badly pronounced in them, which is why they donate only too gladly to those faiths, and why they obey those who turn out to be false contactees and false prophets, as this is now also recently the case in Japan.
Not just in Japan, my friend, because now that political matters in the countries of the Eastern Bloc have taken a turn for the better, Western information now also reaches there with regard to interplanetary flying objects and all sorts of fantasy stories relating to these. Of course, it is inevitable that also in these countries there are many misdirected ones. Swindlers, liars, and deceivers, as well as self-deceivers, who invent and spread untruthful stories about alleged contacts with life forms from planets that are foreign to the Earth. The beginning of such despicable activities already began a long time ago, and already produces bitter and bad fruit all over the world. In particular, the deniers of extraterrestrial life, as well as the sectarian UFO groups all over the world, are the most grateful buyers of such new fairy tales from the countries of the Eastern Bloc that were previously closed to the West. Of course, all deniers and all sectarian advocates of extraterrestrial life try to take advantage of this and try to create a new field of power for themselves, in which they can spread their lies and crazy notions and can force the human beings under their spell. Both sides thus try to spread and to represent what they mistakenly believe to be a viable ideology. Ideologies are, however,
always and in any case doomed for failure.
That is exactly what I wanted to say. You yourself already knew this at the age of 9 years, for I can still clearly recall how in 1946 my father told me that you told him something like this. Throughout the whole universe, there is not a single ideology that could be a life policy or a lifestyle or even just a life guide for the humans. Solely the true truth of the creation, the spirit, and all associated laws and recommendations in wisdom can do this.
Yes, I can still remember saying that to Svath, and that he looked at me so speechlessly.
He told me that at the time. He was shocked that a boy of 9 years could think so profoundly. However, he was not well informed of your origin. For my part, I then informed him of it, so he began to grasp things, and his shock changed into respect and reverence. This, then, was also the reason for the fact that he instructed you in a lot more things and in greater knowledge than what would have been his task.
For which I will be grateful to him throughout the time of my life. I often think of him and wish that I could see him again and thank him for everything.
You have done that very well, and only too well, as he assured me. He even felt so ashamed, just because you showed him your thanks in such a profound and reverential manner.
These thanks I owed to him, and besides, it was a great need and a very deep joy for me to thank him for all his goodness and love, and for all his endlessly great efforts. He taught me all the basic and important significances of the necessary cognition, so already at that time, I also recognized, in reference to religions, that they are just things of power for the subjugation of humankind and for the exploitation of humankind, as well as for the deception of humankind and for the driving of the human beings into complete stupidity. Through the unprovability of the erroneous religious teachings, the human beings feel especially and inconceivably drawn in, and they make use of the unprovable, completely crazy fantasies and delusions that are based in the belief of ghosts and demons, as well as in the fear of the devil and other madness. But out of the delusions, more fanaticism and more roaring, wretched, all-destructive and murderous sectarianism emerge. The delusions of the unprovable religions cast labile human beings under their spell and make them crazy, unpredictable, and murderous beasts.
You already said that to my father, Svath, with the words, "The religious irrational teachings are all illusions that remain unprovable, by which the human being is enslaved and blinded, until he or she becomes an insane and rapacious beast, which consciencelessly, fanatically destroys everything that is contrary to its sick and deadly ideology."
You seem to have memorized my mottos, which I often used at that time, and through which I brought my teacher halfway to despair. I probably still remember my words and phrases of that time in a general manner, but I could not recite them verbatim anymore.
Yes, that is actually so. I have actually memorized them.
That is something. But why?
At that time, I thought that I could teach further by using your wise words, which I also did successfully and which still I do since then. Of course, I always mention the source of my wisdom, whether I use your words to teach human beings who are now on our home worlds or somewhere on a distant world of our Federation. And I must confess to you that I also did this throughout the whole time that we dealt with you presumptuously over the course of recent years, which for me will be a time of sorrow of my life. I just do not understand why we—
Please, not again already. Man, you really are not joking with me? You actually spread the teaching by using my words and phrases and sayings and by telling human beings that these—
Certainly, because why should I not do that?
Hopefully this will not go to my head. Megalomania would be the last thing that I would wish for myself.
You? Megalomaniacal? You tempt me to laugh, ha. Please excuse me, but your remark is really absurd, ha.
Calm down, my son. Otherwise you will be attacked by another choking fit. I was just thinking of the fact that you have apparently made me famous throughout the whole universe.
It is similar to that, yes. But everything happens in a respectful manner.
Good. Well, let us leave that. Otherwise I will still have to take a Sabbath, in order to resign myself to the facts and to calm myself down.
I find that to be original. I have not heard that word for approximately 480 years. I speak of the term Sabbath.
Oh, now I see. I only use this word very rarely because nowadays, this term practically is not understood anymore and is also virtually unknown. For myself, I have somehow retained this from ancient times because it enters my mind over and over again. It is quite possible that it concerns a memory block impulse.
That may very well be. Can you also remember, however, what the meaning of this term is?
Sure. A Sabbath is, on the one hand, a certain unit of measure, and, on the other hand, a law, so to speak, which was ingrained in the ancient Jews. This law was, perhaps, just a rule or simply a guideline, which stated that every Friday, from sunset to Saturday's sunset, a Jew was not allowed to remove himself or herself further than 150 meters from their home. Resulting from this provision, the distance of 1,150 meters was used as a measure of length and was simply called the Sabbath, in accordance with the weekly time, even according to the Sabbath day.
Your explanation is very correct.
Good. If you are content with that, then I would have an important question. Surely, you are oriented over the fact that now is the time when I must calculate the data of the core group members, in order to be able to give them the required numerical values that are necessary for them to shape their own destinies in this life, as well as those of the next life. Moreover, they all must receive the adjustment data, which possesses validity both for this life and also for the next one. Of the new members, I have all the necessary data available, but not of the two newest ones, Andrew and Simone. I have received all the data from the old members except from two of them. The two missing sets of data, so say the two, from whom I have not received the data, were lost or burnt, for they allegedly were not told that they had to keep this data because it would be needed again in 7 years for further calculations. Now, I cannot get the missing data, and I also cannot just leave the two of them lying in the salts, because if I cannot calculate the data for them, then it means for both of them that they will inevitably end up in the bush. For me, there is now only the possibility that new measurements are carried out, and that I then, on the basis of this present data, laboriously calculate everything back to the right measure at that time, 7 years ago. But this means for me that I must set aside all planned works for at least the next 16 months, because I have to spend 8 to 12 hours a day on calculations in order to calculate back to the necessary data. Per person, I would probably need about 8 months of work, whereby I would be so occupied that I could no longer deal with all the other works. Added to this is now the question as to whether there still is not a possibility that I could get to know the data otherwise.
The possibility would exist through the memory block. But you know that the data may not simply be retrieved from there for such purposes, because this would violate the adopted regulations and the codex. But if one would do so, nevertheless, it would not result in bad injury to you, but to the two negligent ones. And since you say that you would need 8 months of time per group member, in order to make the necessary calculations, 12 hours a day of hard work might be very far understated, because you would have to calculate everything using your own strength. But even a terrestrial computer would also take up this time if such was able to perform these types of calculations. Sorry, but I see no possibility of being helpful to you and advising you in this difficult matter, because I am not educated in such concerns, and therefore can give you no support or consolation. I actually do not know of a solution to this problem. However, there still remains the possibility that I can strive with Quetzal around your problem, because he is well versed in such matters and specializes in them, so maybe he can help you. But do not have too high expectations, because to my knowledge, even our best specialists do not know of any way of acquiring such data of the past any differently than just through the tiresome and never-ending calculations over many months. But now, let us not talk about this any further, and we will leave Quetzal the word, which I will then convey to you.
Good. Then another question. Andreas and Gilgamesha, where are these two supposed to be inserted into the initiation blocks?
About that, I have been informed by Quetzal. From him, I am to convey to you and all group members dear greetings. Yes, Gilgamesha should be included in the fourth female group, so with Philia and Cornelia. Andreas, whose time for the initiation will only come much later, should be included in the male group 3, so thus with Piero and Wolfgang.
Thanks.
Do you have no other question?
No, not at the moment, maybe later. Do you still have something to ask or to explain?
Certainly. Currently, on the Earth, a large-scale interest has awoken worldwide once again, in reference to alleged sightings of unidentified flying objects that should be of extraterrestrial origin. For many months, major activities of unknown flying apparatuses have also been observed time and again all over the world, and in many cases, even entire groups of humans have become observers. But also in many cases, observations are reported where there were not actually any to report, not to mention the alleged personal encounters with extraterrestrial life forms that are supposed to have taken place. In fact, few extraterrestrial flying machines have been sighted by Earth humans, but this, unfortunately, does not mean that all sightings of unidentified flying objects were such objects. In truth, there were only a few, whose sightings often were not even disclosed to the public. The rest of all the other objects sighted, which became designated and which are designated as UFOs, were and are of purely natural and terrestrial origin, having very natural causes. The fact that some charlatans, fun makers, swindlers, and deceivers are involved in such works who, through technological means, conjure phenomena or allow light-flying machines to rise up into the atmosphere in order to bring the Earth humans into turmoil or to move them into anxiety and terror or simply to make fools of them through practical jokes. This should be clear even to the most naive of the naive. But whoever is UFO believing and wants to see ghosts, of course, sees them everywhere, so even where there are none. Also, frauds and charlatans arrive at their wealth in such a manner because they can live very well off of the idiots. This was and has been the case since ages ago. In addition, it must be said that a certain caution is also necessary with everything, because not everything is simply hallucinations, sectarian insanity, charlatanism, and fraud. For flying machines also appear that are directed by Earth humans, who have created a massive base in the South American region and who are striving for world domination, as this is also very well known to you, but we should provide no further details about this. But in any case, there are utterly dark and bad terrestrial life forms, humans of this world who possess a high technology and corresponding flying apparatuses. In order to be able to cause disaster with these, if they could only do so, and if they would not be prevented from such doings by certain circumstances. Nevertheless, like the Americans, Canadians, and Russians, they repeatedly move the Earth humans into fear and panic by demonstrating their aircraft in the day or night sky. When they are on a thief's tour or are otherwise flying through the air on some occasion, that is often difficult to fathom. But furthermore, a few things are still to be mentioned in relation to the belief of the Earth humans who devote themselves with great pleasure to the religions and their representatives, as well as to the alleged spiritual healers, sectarians, and alleged mystics, as well as to alleged channelers, mediums, and contactees, etc., and who become enslaved to and dependent upon such. Of these, the following is to be said. Even though the scientists of the Earth are still far from being gods, as they often believe themselves to be, they still stand in such a high position on the Earth that they accomplish a lot of things, and they have acquired a rather enormous amount of insight into all conceivably possible fields of knowledge. The Earth human should not rely too much on the so-called mystics, mediums, channelers, healers, contactees, and religions, etc., and should not get involved with these because everything is built on weak legs and usually on very unreal things that, with each occasion, can collapse in on themselves like a house of cards. Therefore, the Earth human should, in good measure, rely solely on his or her reason and on his or her intellect and also on their logic. But this also means that the Earth human should, in good measure, rely on the real sciences of physics and astronomy, on medicine, and on the other given sciences of forms related to reality and should turn themselves to these, even though the scientists of these areas still commit many mistakes, and even though much ignorance and many errors and negations still appear with them. Nevertheless, they are real scientists who occupy themselves with the effective truth of the matter and with its laws and recommendations, and who thus adhere to the given facts, which unfortunately cannot be said of the so-called esoteric scientists and their followers and believers, for typically, with few exceptions, they are all just pseudoscientists who rarely step into the public. This pseudoscience is often only pursued by earthlings who are utterly insignificant and who suffer from feelings of inferiority and similar damage. Like also the alleged mediums, channelers, and contactees, etc., who only pursue all of this in order to be able to step into the limelight of certain groups or the greater public. And pseudoscience ultimately refers to everything that falls within the scope of what is designated as psi. Channeling, mediums, ghosts and demons, religion, contactees, and esotericism, for these things do not exist in reality. The actual form of the spirit that should really result from this is solely to be called the teaching of the spirit, aka creation energy teaching, which contains within itself everything that is of a spiritual and material nature. Thus, the teaching of the Spirit is nothing other than the teaching of the creation. But this includes everything within itself, namely the creational natural laws and recommendations, as well as all material and spiritual life forms in the one and only creation-given form of reality, which exists on the earth and everywhere else in the universe. And indeed everything is thus given that you give and teach this teaching as the only one on the entire surface of the earth. who is responsible for such, and who is a prophet for all human beings on the earth, for all nations, for all races, and for every single earthling or non-earthling. But this, my friend, is better known and better understood by you than it could ever be by me in my present life. And I say this another time, you are responsible for the spreading of the teaching of the Spirit for the entire earth world. So for every single person, for every nation, and for every race. So also for all human beings of different skin colors. Thus for the white human beings, the yellow human beings, the red, brown, black, blue, and green, etc., who populate the earth. You are the prophet of the new time for the whole earth world and for all human beings on this planet. This is already written in the Talmud Emmanuel, and whoever may read this should read and learn there of the predictions that were already given about 2,000 years ago. The teaching of the Spirit provided by you is the uniform teaching for all human races on the earth, as well as in the whole universe, because the truth of the creation and the resulting teaching of the Spirit is uniform and without difference for all human beings and other life forms in the whole universe. There are no differences at all in the teaching of the Spirit, neither for one life form nor for another.
I actually still wanted to talk to you and ask you some questions about that. But now you have talked about it in detail, so I really have nothing more to say or ask. But something else. Can you tell me, who are the oldest and who are the youngest human beings on the earth, if one excludes the earthlings whom were created on the earth?
The first three peoples, who were the first to come to the earth, were at the same time the red ones, the brown ones, and the white ones. Of these, however, only the ones of normal growth. This was about 22 million years ago, when the destroyer had done its work of destruction in the Lyran home systems. It was not until much later that also differently colored ones, as well as giants, gigantic ones, titans and dwarfish ones, as well as beings of nature came to the earth, among others also dwarfs, from which much later, namely only about 21,000 years ago, distant descendants settled on the shores of the Sonora Lake and lived there until the embankment in the west of the lake broke and swept everything away. The shores upon which the approximately 40-centimeter-tall dwarf beings lived were at that time located exactly where the center stands today. The differently colored ones who subsequently came to the earth were exclusively very strongly dark-skinned and established themselves on the land that is today regarded as the continent of Africa, from where they then spread further, some to Australia and New Zealand and others to various other locations. The yellow peoples of the Chinese and Japanese, these are the most recent inhabitants on the earth because their appearance on this planet was only a little more than one cosmic age ago, and indeed quite exactly 25,178 years ago. They came here from the planet Nissan in the neighborhood of Lasan in the Lyra systems. Before that, however, as has only been discovered in recent years, they lived on the far side of the sun on a planet with the name Kudra, in a solar system that was designated as the Nissan system. They came to the Lyra systems and to Nissan 2.4 million years ago because they had to emigrate as a consequence of overpopulation. And they found the way to our primal home planets by means of an ancient Lyran Great Expedition fleet that explored on the other side of the sun and encountered the planet Kudra in the Nissan system, and there again, the yellow peoples.
And where then is this other side of the sun? If I am correctly informed, then by the sun, you do not mean our sun, and also not a sun in the old Lyran system. Rather, you speak of that sun that we know as the central sun of our Milky Way?
That corresponds with the facts, yes.
Our scientists of astronomy say that the central Milky Way sun is about 45,000 light-years away from us. But you have explained to me that this is an erroneous calculation and mistaken assumption, as the real distance amounts to 10,000 light-years fewer.
Our distance data are certain. The Sol system outside the Milky Way constitutes something like an enclave because it floats as a single system far outside a spiral arm. The distance to calculate from there to the middle of the central sun is 35,002 light-years. A distance of 79,471 light-years is measured from there to the Nisan system, which floats on the outer end of one of the solar systems on the other side of the Milky Way's opposing spiral arm.
Thanks. One of us has wanted to know these data for a long time already.
There is no reason that you must thank me.
Even so, I have yet further questions.
Go ahead.
Thanks. The name Jesus, from what original name does it derive, and what is its meaning?
You really do not know that?
I am not sure, which is why I did not answer this question when I was asked about it.
On what supposition, then, is your conjecture based?
I thought that the original name was Jesodos, which means something like the fundamental one. But as I said, I am not sure of this. Since my breakdown on the 4th of November 1982, I just have my small difficulties with my memory.
That is well known to me, but despite this disadvantage, you are right in your supposition. The now world-famous name, Jesus, derives from the original name Jesodos, which had undergone various changes over the course of thousands of years. Thus, it became Jesod and Jesad, from which then Jesod arose, then Jesa and Jesa, and at last, Jesus. The meaning is actually what you specified, the fundamental one.
Good. Then another question. At the beginning of the contacts with Simyase,
she told me the facts regarding the destruction of the Earth's ozone layer via the irresponsible machinations
of the Earth humans who would destroy this protective shield all around the Earth by the use of toxic chemical substances. At that time, the task was imposed upon me that I should warn the terrestrial scientists about it, which I also did with a newsletter that I sent to many governments, chemical factories, and universities all over the world, but without ever having received a response or even a slight indication from the receivers. But then, some time later, there suddenly appeared newspaper reports, and messages were also broadcast on the radio and on television, which dealt with the destruction of the ozone layer. But the fact that I had made the scientists attentive and had awakened them to this, not a word of it was reported, of course. But now, the actual killer of the ozone layer, which is very well known on the Earth, is called chlorofluorocarbon, short form designated as CFC. At that time, however, Simyase spoke of bromine, or of bromine gases, etc., which would destroy the ozone layer of the Earth. But that cannot correspond to the truth because, as is evident, it really concerns the CFC, which is responsible for the destruction.
Your statement is absolutely correct, but there is still a misunderstanding that unfortunately was not considered by us and which I would like to correct, since you have now mentioned this. Thus, it is good that you brought up this word.
Unfortunately, the question did not come from me because Guido drew my attention to the fact that with this statement of Simyase, a contradiction apparently arises.
You say it correctly, it is only an apparent contradiction because in truth there is none. At that time, my daughter explained the facts to you completely correctly, but with the thoughtlessness that she mixed up earthly linguistic terms a little with new and ancient languages, and, moreover, with ours. The term bromine also exists in our language as the word bromos. But for us, this has the same meaning that the term chlorofluorocarbon has in the German language. In our language, we designate the chlorofluorocarbon simply as bromos, which is expressed in the German language simply as bromine, but for us, this also has the meaning of foul-smelling gas. This word is also found on the earth in the ancient Greek language in the same form as we have it in our language, namely bromos, but with a slightly different meaning, for in the ancient Greek language, the word bromos means bad smell. So at that time, my daughter expressed the facts quite correctly with her explanation, but with the use of a word from our language that she simply converted into the German language, yet into the term bromine gases, and thus a terrible misunderstanding arose which she did not realize at the time, and which has first officially made its appearance now since you directed the appropriate question toward it. For this misunderstanding that arose inadvertently, I ask for forbearance.
There is no reason for which you would have to ask for forbearance. Misunderstandings can arise now and then. For my part, I still have a multi-part question, but you have actually already answered it. However, I still think that we should lose a few words over it again because it just somehow seems that this is absolutely necessary. It concerns the matter around Yoshi Kozakura.
If you deem further questions as necessary, then go ahead.
Thanks. Well, I find it somewhat depressing that Yoshi Kozakura is slowly but surely losing her sense of reality and wandering down some pretty nasty and delusional paths. She moves further and further away from the truth, biased and blinded by the liars and deceivers who pretend that they would have important information from allegedly higher spirit forms and allegedly from extraterrestrials for her. Apart from a few misdirected ones, most who are informed know that this just concerns lies and deception and a large-scale swindle. But why exactly Yoshi Kozakura falls for this is a mystery to me. But anyways, I wish her all the best, and just hope that she will soon open her eyes and recognize the full truth through this, so that she can find her way back to this same truth again, and rediscover the path of truth she has begun. But now, to my actual question. Yoshi Kozakura is badly influenced in swindler-like mendacious and deceitful forms, namely by several untruthful and deceitful degenerates. At least 3 of these are of some significance with regard to incredible, mendacious, and deceitful influence. As I was told from Japan, one of these persons of lies and deceit is a woman by the name of Emiko. This liar and deceiver now maintains that she has contact with a life form from the Pleiades, whose name is Alan or something similar. Can you now tell me what this name means, if it exists at all? Furthermore, I know very well that all allegations of this woman Emiko are nothing but sordid and monstrous lies, as well as malicious fraud, and just as malicious swindle.
Your words correspond to the pure truth. All assertions that Yoshi Kozakura and many other human beings make, in reference to alleged contacts with us or with other life forms than those on Earth, are based on nothing more than incredibly unscrupulous lies and on deceitful, swindler-like machinations. You alone are an exception to the truth of this. This also refers to messages from beings that are foreign to the Earth, which are transmitted to the human beings of the Earth. Also in relation to this, you are the only prophetic power and the only power at all who is currently living on the earth and who is capable of fulfilling this task. This was already explained by the high spirit levels. Arahat Athersata and Patah Li, who have absolute control and knowledge of all these issues and possibilities on the earth and throughout the whole universe. Thus, Yoshi Kozakura also does not have any capabilities for any contacts that would be other than material contacts and contacts with the Earth humans. Also, there are currently no other human beings on the Earth who would have such capabilities, besides those who are known to you. Therefore, Yoshi Kozakura also has no persons around herself or in her circle of friends who would be medium talented in such a wise that they could have contacts with any beings and life forms that would be of a different nature than just those that are of a purely terrestrial and material origin. At present, such capabilities are available to no one on the Earth or even in an understood development, except with those whom you know and honor as genuine. Apart from the few initiates, you are actually the only life form who currently has such capabilities. However, this has its far-reaching and highly spiritual reasons, which you can judge and explain better in every respect than I will ever be able to do in my present life. And after you and the few others, some centuries will pass on this planet before the next person on Earth will have come so far that he or she can step into contact with life forms that are other than material and terrestrial. Now, concerning the name Alan, or even what this word should be, it is to be understood that this is only a deceitfully invented word formation, which holds no significance or meaning in itself. This word form also cannot be found in our language or in any language known to us, and we know of and have stored more than 3.7 million languages in our entire field of knowledge and understanding. You already informed me of this word formation, Alan, during my last visit, so in the meantime, I could make sure that it exists in no language known to us. Consequently, a group of specialists in Japan tried to get to the bottom of this, whereby it arose that the word formation Alan is a pure, imprudent and mendacious invention of fraudulent and cunningly dishonest Earth humans whose evolutionary states lie within the lower areas of the lowest earthly states. The specific word formation, Alan, which is used as a name for fraud and swindle, does not appear in the entire universe that is known to us, but now, that does not necessarily mean that names of similar forms are not well known to us. So, for example, the names Alan, Aland, Alan, Alan, Aljon, Alan, and Nala exist in different languages known to us, with this last name representing the reverse form of the crazy word formation, Alan. The meanings of these names, however, are all very negative, which is why they only find use with humans who live in degeneracy and only exist with human beings whose development and compliance in matters of truth and true evolution are still on primitive levels. Thus, the meanings of the names are also accordingly primitive, just as Alan means the one who is contrary to truth. Aland means the twister of truth. Alan has the meaning of the despiser of truth, and Alan stands for the worthlessness of the hater of truth. The name Aljon has the meaning of the destructive one, while Alan means the deceiver. Nala, the name that would result from the reversal of Alan, has the meaning of the liar.
So all the meanings are of no good value.
Certainly that is so. But now, my friend, we should go away from here and into my aircraft. Time has not stood still.
Right, it has already become rather late. But do not forget to awaken Ava again out of her deep sleep. Otherwise, she will be sleeping for the next 3 or 4 weeks or even longer before you appear again. But let us go now, if you have pressed your little button.
That is already done. However, let's go now before she wakes up from our conversation. We can talk further in my aircraft?
Yes, let's clear out. Out into the bushes, or even into the ether. So be it.
But now it is really that time. So here we are. And as I know you, you still have some questions.
That is indeed so. First, I would like to ask about the Pope again, namely about when his true end will come, and the second thing that interests me is when an upswing can be expected in Switzerland again, and thus the peak of unemployment will be over. Quetzal once said that it would be around the year 2003 or 2004.
The upswing will actually begin in the year 2003, but it will first be noticeably perceivable in the year 2004, as is clear from our foresight, and if new, unforeseen things of a negative form do not arise. The present Pope should have already parted from this life about 10 years ago on 31/5/1981 as a result of an assassination attempt. But fortunately, up to that time, the entire international political situation, along with many other things, had changed for the better in such a manner that our probability calculations were not fulfilled. But what now relates to the actual death of Pope John Paul II, we have made a prediction, according to which he will die on.
Then he will still remain in office for a long time and still experience some years of the third millennium.
Yes, but his final years will be a time of infirmity for him, so he will not have a pleasant old age.
It is not to be wished for him. Then I still have another question regarding the so-called spontaneous human combustion, which actually is not as spontaneous as is accepted. Can you tell me something about it?
I can do that, but to my knowledge you know about it, so first, I would gladly like to hear from you what you know about it.
Of course, as you wish. My knowledge is that the spontaneous combustion of the body concerns life processes, respectively physiological and functional operations of the whole body, where the basic factors are the consciousness and the subconsciousness, the thoughts and feelings, the emotions, the nerves, the sensibility and sensitivity, and naturally, also the psyche. Thus, it is an aggregate physiological condition, through which a spontaneous combustion of the body is triggered, whereby the swinging waves, energies, and forces of the aforementioned factors are developed, which also attract certain cosmic together with the fact that chemical reactions are caused in the body through which gases develop, which spread throughout the whole body and into the individual cells. Depression, nerves, pain, suffering, delusions, sorrow, deep depression, and schizophrenic factors, along with many other factors, can fundamentally contribute to the process by giving rise to the aforementioned swinging waves, powers, and energies, which will then lead to the spontaneous combustion of the body, in that the produced gases ignite themselves. As a rule, combustion occurs from the inside out, more rarely from the outside, whereby a heat of up to 1,500 degrees or more is created. Thus, the spontaneous combustion energies, etc., are generated by the person himself or herself, together with the fact that during this process, he or she also attracts cosmic energies to themselves, whereby a spontaneous combustion becomes final. But this does not mean that in every case, a fatal self-combustion must take place, because depending on the psychological and consciousness-related condition of the person, also just external burns on the body and on the limbs can become visible, or even mild or severe blistering. In such cases, the self-combustion processes can be stopped if the thoughts and feelings are arranged correctly, but usually, professional and good psychological or psychiatric help is required for this. Concerning a released self-combustion of the aforesaid kind, it is the case, with certain exceptions, that the combustion heat only appears centrally, and thus, the burning in the body only appears and lasts for a very short time, as the body disintegrates into ashes. This means that in general, the nearer and further surroundings are not affected by the combustion, respectively by the heat, or are only affected very little. That's what I know. Now I would just like to know, to what extent all of what I said is true.
Your explanation corresponds to our knowledge, which I could still scientifically explain more precisely. But I must refrain from this, in order not to violate our directives, because the Earth humans must investigate and discover the exact insights themselves. That which you have explained cannot relate to our directives.
That is sufficient for me. Then another question regarding the AIDS epidemic. When will this begin to develop and spread out in such a manner that it slowly takes the upper hand and, thus, takes hold in a rapid manner?
That will be after the turn of the millennium, but the spreading of the epidemic to a great extent will not become properly grasped until the years 2003 and 2004.
And what about the indebtedness of the nations? Quetzal once said that the national debt will grow rapidly in practically all countries.
Yes, that will be so. For in the coming time, the governments will become more and more irresponsible in managing the national budgets and will drive the national debts to such heights that hardly any or even no possibilities will exist of still being able to avoid the financial collapses of certain nations, let alone that the debts could be amortized ever again. In this connection, the governments will become more and more irresponsible and more criminal, but the human beings can do nothing about this, because on the one hand, the national powerful figures enjoy immunity, which is absolutely wrong, and are hostile and criminal towards the human beings, and on the other hand, the human beings are much too negligent and put too much faith in the governments that they would question the machinations of the governments.
A clear word. But something else. Have you already found out that certain Earth humans are simply inconvincible in reference to religious faith concerning everything that is just purely man-made? I am thinking, for example, of rebirth and of what is maintained and erroneously taught in relation to this, that the personality becomes reincarnated. Although, this is not the case because, after the death of the body, the personality is dissolved by the entire consciousness block and becomes pure energy, from which, through the entire consciousness block, an entirely new personality is created, which is no longer identical to the preceding one. Only the spirit form becomes reborn, respectively reincarnated, and thus, not the personality. But now, there are the super clever ones who deny this and claim that Jesus Christ, respectively Emmanuel, will be reborn as a personality. But this is utter nonsense, just like the erroneous religious teaching that deceased human beings, within the scope of rebirth, would become reincarnated as animals.
These absurdities are well known to me, but it is extremely difficult and often quite impossible to be able to teach human beings who are infected with such delusional beliefs, because every religious or sectarian faith enslaves everything in the world of apprehension, the world of thought, and the world of feeling of the person, and evokes a certain obsession in such a manner that reason becomes turned off and becomes completely devoid of any purpose, whereby any clear logic is nipped in the bud. Religion, as this is common on the earth among the human beings, is like a vicious drug which disrupts and kills both the intellect and reason. And human beings who have fallen victim to a religious or even sectarian faith are not only unpredictable in their unreasonableness, but they give themselves over and into the hands and responsibility of an imaginary deity who should direct everything for them. And such religion-believing or sect-believing human beings are usually also far from a true humaneness, whereby they are addicted to retaliation and also demand revenge for deeds of all kinds that are inflicted upon them or upon any others. These, in complete contrast to human beings who are knowing in accordance with the creational laws and recommendations and who live by them. These are the ones who honor all life and who protect and preserve a true humaneness in dignity. But now, dear friend, I still have to discuss various matters of a private nature with you, so now you should not raise any further questions.
Your wish is my command. Then fire away. No, one moment please, because I still have 2 or 3 questions that would be important. If it is still possible that I can ask them and you can answer them for me?
Then so be it. But after that, you must hold back with further questions.
Okay. Thanks. What is actually up with the Qumran Dead Sea Scrolls? Quetzal explained to me in 1985, just like Sfath shortly before his departure, that at the beginning of the year 1947, a nomadic shepherd had found ancient scrolls from the time before Emmanuel's birth in a cave near the village or place of Khirbet Qumran by the Dead Sea. However, neither Quetzal nor Sfath told me more details about it. Can you tell me more about it? I read somewhere that the scrolls of Emmanuel or so are ascribed.
The scrolls of Qumran at the Dead Sea do not represent the history and teaching of Emmanuel, but rather of a self-appointed, megalomaniacal and self-glorifying Jewish scribe referred to as Son of God and Highest of all Angels by the name of Menahem. He was a revolutionary who mixed the old teachings of the Bible with new ideas and with his own ideas, and, in this context, in a self-proclaimed manner, called himself prophet and referred his followers, with regard to his person, to the testimony of the prophet Isaiah regarding the coming Messiah, whereby he saw himself as this Messiah. As a result of his actions and his delusion, he was rejected by the Pharisaic scribes and was ultimately pursued and threatened with death. Menahem, the self-proclaimed prophet, founded the Essene sect, which was also known at that time as the Qumran sect. He was their supreme leader and maintained that he was the Son of God. And he related Isaiah's statements about the sufferings, the life, the crucifixion, and the alleged resurrection from the dead, which was announced by former prophets in reference to Emmanuel, to himself, and disseminated this. Then, he actually became ostracized and pursued. In order to be murdered then in Jerusalem by Roman soldiers, after which he was left lying in an alleyway for 3 days before he was taken and buried by sect members. He had assembled 160 disciples around himself, who then invented and spread the alleged story of the resurrection and the ascension after some time. The false prophet, in an arrogant and megalomaniacal manner, called himself the Beloved and the Companion of the King, and by this he meant God King. Thus, in his delusion, he presumed himself as the chosen Messiah and saw himself seated on the throne in the council of the gods and angels, so therefore also seated in heaven at the right hand of God. Unlike Emmanuel, who never called himself Messiah, who also did not see himself as such, and who forbade his disciples from ever calling him such, Menahem was eager to be regarded, respected, and revered as Messiah. And when, in the future, it will be claimed by those who are ignorant that Emmanuel had received the teachings of Menahem, which will happen in the foreseeable time, it will not only represent falsehood, but also defamation and slander against Emmanuel and the true teaching. Emmanuel did not receive or continue on a tiny piece of the self-styled sect leader. For the truth is that the prophet Menahem, out of his own grace and as a stroke of fate, encountered the secret, old traditional teaching of the Spirit, which was reported to him in an oral manner. It was the true teaching, as taught by the ancient prophets, and then also taught by Emmanuel, in the execution of his mission, and also in detail to certain parts, according to the instructions of Gabriel and several others who were involved in the affair. From this it cannot and may not in any wise be said in the coming time that Emmanuel had used Menahem's teachings for his own purposes. Such an assertion corresponds to a bad misrepresentation of the actual truth. In the coming time, a large number of books will be written about the Qumran scrolls. But these will not contain the facts, unfortunately, but rather untenable theories and assertions, etc., and thus not the truth and not the real connections, and these will not reveal the reality. But back to the false prophet, Menahem. He had succumbed to the delusion that he had reached a superhuman state, where he saw himself as immune to carnal desires and as standing over every possible capacity for physical suffering, and he also said this. A nonsense that he also preached all around, not just within his sect. In equal measure, he also presumed himself as the most glorious in magnificence person and, at the same time, the most despicable person on earth, but only despicable in the eyes of his adversaries. In his delusion, he also presumed himself as absolutely infallible and as elevated above the whole world, as this is found as a parallel with the Pope. Furthermore, he was so blinded and arrogant in his delusion that he himself described his false teachings and speeches as absolutely incomparable. In very great measure, he glorified himself and saw himself not only as Messiah and prophet, but also as God himself.
So Emmanuel had no connection at all with the Qumran sect, respectively with the Qumran Esseni sect.
That corresponds to what I explained.
Of course, and what was explained is also sufficient. Then another question. We have often talked about black holes. Someone asked me about them again. To my knowledge and in accordance with your explanations, it is the case that black holes draw in all kinds of matter that are attainable for them, along with tremendous amounts of information. Nevertheless, all the matter and information cannot be completely imprisoned in a black hole, but will be partially ejected again, from which new stars, etc. then develop. And if I remember correctly, black holes eventually explode again, from which then, through the tremendous forces, energies, and masses of matter, new galaxies originate. You also said, when I asked about it once, that other dimensions couldn't be penetrated, and time traveling couldn't be carried out through black holes. Is this right as such?
Yes, your explanation is correct.
Then still the last question. Over and over again, I am asked about the space photos of my great journey, namely, in reference to whether these were traded around and became falsified.
You probably do not mean the paper images, but rather the slides. Yes, those were greatly falsified by the machinations of the fallible ones, and I mean all of them, because out of all those that Quetzal took and examined, none were found that were not maliciously manipulated, and they ultimately turned out to be shots that correspond to a future film that was produced by our impulses on the Earth.
And how did it happen, then, that the shots resembled the conditions of reality?
Because our transmitted impulses were given to the Earth humans in the form of impulse images that corresponded to true, existent things of foreign worlds.
Planets, suns, humans, apparatuses, dinosaurs, and plants? Were all these things included?
That corresponds to that which was done. But now, my friend, that must be enough of the questions.
Okay, I'm satisfied. Thank you. Then now fire away with what you still have to discuss privately.